Your salary looks about the same as it did 5 years ago, but somehow, you can't afford the same life. Groceries cost more, rent costs more, and that savings account is barely moving. You're working just as hard as before, but the finish line keeps moving further away. Here's something almost nobody talks about. One entire country felt exactly this way 30 years ago. That country is Japan, and what happened there is not just ancient history, it is a live preview of your future. Today I'll use Japan as a time machine and show you 3 moves that can protect your career, your savings, and your home before the crash hits you. Let's start with a simple fact. Japan's population peaked at 128 million people in 2008 and has been shrinking every single year since. When population shrinks, something brutal happens. Fewer people are born, so there are fewer consumers, fewer workers, and fewer taxpayers. That creates a negative loop. Companies earn less, so they pay less, so workers spend less, so companies earn even less. Economists call this a demographic death spiral, and it's almost impossible to reverse once it begins. For 30 years straight, Japanese wages barely moved. Entire working generations lived with flat incomes while prices slowly crept up. And here is the physical proof. Japan now has 9 million vacant homes, more empty houses than the entire population of New York City. That's 1 in every 7 Japanese homes sitting completely empty, a number that climbs higher every single year. In rural Japan, some of these abandoned homes, called akiyas, sell for less than the price of a used car. And as each neighborhood gets more empty houses, the value of every home around it drops, a silent chain reaction. Meanwhile, Japan's younger workers earn barely more today than they did in the 1990s, while everything around them costs twice as much. Think of it this way: Japan's economy was like a pizza. When the population shrank, the pizza didn't get bigger, it just got sliced thinner for everyone. As young workers got squeezed, Japan's tax burden shifted. The remaining workers had to carry a heavier load to fund the growing retiree population. Small businesses across rural Japan didn't fail because of bad management, they closed because the customers simply stopped existing. Now here's the pattern that should stop you cold. Japan's fertility rate when this all started was 1.5 and America's is now 1.57. The timelines are almost identical. America is simply running the same program on a 25-year delay. Japan's story is not a tragedy unique to Asia, it is a blueprint. That demographic math applies to any country that stops having children. The key lesson from Japan's time machine: the decline doesn't happen overnight. It happens so slowly that most people only recognize it when it's too late. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable question of this entire video. Is this already happening to you right now? You thought this was a Japan story, but let me show you why it's actually your story. In 2025, the CDC confirmed that the US birth rate hit a brand new all-time record low: 1.57 children per woman, down 23% since 2007. A stable economy needs a fertility rate of 2.1. The US is now half a child per woman below that threshold, and the gap is growing. The US population is still technically growing, but mainly because of immigration, and in 2025, net migration dropped to a fraction of prior years. Here's what that means for your wallet. Fewer workers means a smaller tax base, which means bigger deficits, which means someone has to pay. That someone is you through higher taxes, reduced services, or both. And it gets more specific. The Social Security Trust Fund is now officially projected to hit insolvency as early as 2032. When that happens, federal law requires an automatic 23% cut to everyone's retirement benefits, with 0 exceptions. In 1960, there were 5 workers paying into Social Security for every 1 retiree. Today that number has dropped below 3, and it keeps falling. The math here is not political, it is pure arithmetic, and arithmetic does not care about your vote or your feelings. Meanwhile, US household debt just hit record levels. People are borrowing to maintain a standard of living their wages can no longer support. Even US housing markets in rural and mid-sized towns are starting to show Japan-style vacancy increases, empty storefronts, unused office space, declining neighborhoods. You're not watching a slow disaster from a safe distance, you are already inside it. But here's what separates Japan's winners from Japan's losers. It wasn't luck, it was preparation, and it started with information exactly like this. The people in Japan who understood what was coming early, they adjusted their careers, repositioned their money, and moved their families strategically. And that's exactly what you're going to do right now, starting with survival hack number 1. Career hack. In a shrinking economy, most jobs will disappear, but exactly 2 categories will explode in demand. Category 1 is healthcare and elder care, because in an aging society, there will never be enough nurses, therapists, or care workers. Category 2 is automation, because companies in a shrinking workforce will replace every job they can with AI and robotics. Everything in between, general admin, middle management, routine processing, those jobs are the first to vanish when revenue pressure hits. The survival rule for your career is this: specialize aggressively, because generalists in a shrinking market become invisible. You don't have to change careers overnight, but adding one high-value skill in AI, data, or caregiving can completely transform your market value in 2 years. Career hack confirmed. Now money hack, the one most people are most wrong about. The biggest financial mistake people make in a demographic decline is trusting that the government's retirement promise will still be there when they need it. Japan's pension system has already quietly cut benefits multiple times over the last decade, each time framed as minor adjustments. With US Social Security potentially insolvent by 2032, your financial survival cannot be built on that foundation alone. The move is to build your own wealth engine, and the engine runs on one fuel: consistent, automated, globally diversified investing. Don't just invest in your home country's market, because that market is tied directly to your home country's demographic decline. Economies in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and parts of Africa still have young, growing populations. Those are the growth engines of the next 30 years. The investors in Japan who survived the lost decades were the ones with global exposure, not the ones who bet everything on domestic growth that never came. Automate a fixed monthly investment before you ever touch your paycheck. Because behavior is the real enemy of wealth, not market timing. Money hack done. And now the third hack, which is the most controversial thing I'll say in this entire video. Home hack. The idea that buying a house is always the smartest investment you can make. That idea was built for a world with a growing population. In areas where the population is shrinking, a home is not an asset, it is a liability chained to a buyer pool that is disappearing. Japan proved this brutally. Homeowners in depopulating rural areas cannot sell their houses. There are simply no buyers left to sell to. Before you buy any property, check one number. Has the population in that area grown or shrunk over the past 10 years? Buy in cities with strong job growth, healthcare anchors, or university economies. Those are the regions that will attract people when others are emptying out. And if you already own property in a shrinking area, the survival move is not to panic. It's to have a clear exit strategy before the exit window closes. 3 survival hacks: career, money, home, and together they are a complete system for navigating an economy in demographic decline. Let's land this. Japan's 3-decade experience is not a story, it is a mathematical proof of what happens when demographic decline meets an unprepared society. The US fertility rate just hit a record low of 1.57, Social Security faces insolvency by 2032. And home values in shrinking regions are already moving in the wrong direction. The 3 moves: pivot your career toward growth sectors, invest globally and independently, and buy property only where people are actually moving toward. You have a window right now that Japan's workers in the 1990s simply did not have. The data is in front of you before the crisis peaks. If this video gave you one new thing to think about, hit subscribe. Share this with one person in your life who still thinks the economy is going to go back to normal. Because normal isn't coming back, but prepared is the next best thing. Turn anxiety into action. Your knowledge is your shield.